Oh my god, guys, it's a trial episode like the original series episode Court Martial, or the Next Generation episode Drumhead or The Measure of a Man, or the Deep Space Nine episode Dex or A Simple Investigation, or the Enterprise episode Judgment, or Star Trek VI and Star Trek Beyond, and the Vulcan Hello from Star Trek Discovery, and I'm sure Voyager probably had one, I don't remember off the top of my head. Dang it, Lower Decks, I can make references too! Hello everyone, and welcome to my review of Star Trek Lower Decks Season 1, Episode 8, Veritas. And as per usual, I'm going to be giving my spoiler-free thoughts on this episode before I get into my spoiler-filled thoughts, so if you haven't seen the episode, don't worry. It's a safe space here for you. We're just going to talk some spoiler-free stuff, and I'm just going to give you my thoughts before we get into the danger zone of the spoilers. I don't know what voice this is, but it's safe. It's a safe place. So, as I joked about in the opening of this video, this is a trial episode where we have our Lower Decks characters put on trial to try and defend their Upper Decks captain command characters. And it's very much evoking a lot of the trial scenes that we've seen throughout Star Trek, most clearly Star Trek VI, a few others here and there. And this one was a lot of fun because this episode was very much just a vehicle for having little vignettes and little stories with each individual character. But what I really loved about this trial episode was that it was really not focused on the trial at all, but a way for us to get little vignettes for each and every single one of our characters. Meriner got one, Rutherford got one, Tendi got one, Boimler kind of got one. He got a little bit something different, but I don't want to spoil that. We'll talk about that in the spoiler-filled section. But I just loved that each individual story was focusing on one character interacting with one or two members of the command staff of the Cerritos. And so we got to sort of see how each individual character sort of got to act on their own, sans the other characters on the show, sans their normal relationships that we get to see them with. And it was just a lot of fun and just some really interesting different stories. And what I liked for each vignette, without getting too much into spoilers, is that each one has its own storytelling conceit. It's not just a one-off story with the character. There's actually something unique to the way the story is being told through each character. And it just made it a lot of fun to watch all of these. Also, there's some really, really amazing references throughout this episode. I don't want to call them all out in the non-spoiler section because half the fun is just being like, oh my gosh, they're doing that thing from that movie. More so than usual. Like, a lot of the time, a lot of the joy of Lower Decks is a lot of references, but there's so many that are just explicitly part of the story here that it's just a ton of fun to catch all of them and just enjoy all of them. And there's one in particular that I just warms my heart, my nerd heart, that I'll touch upon towards the end. And there's also a really, really cool cameo that, if you've been paying attention to some of the news surrounding Lower Decks, is in this episode, but I won't spoil if you haven't heard all of that before. But there is a really, really fun cameo in this episode for all of you. I think the only negative that I really have is there's a final joke towards the end of the episode that's sort of the big revelation of what's going on and what the sort of trial is all about, that I think dragged on a tad too long. I will give it this, it was surprising. I didn't expect it and I really enjoyed it, but I think it went on just a hair too long and after I got the joke. But I still found it incredibly, incredibly funny. So that's me like nitpicking and really trying to find something to focus in on. And then the only other nitpick that I could say is not really a problem with this episode, but just one that I keep harping on, is I do want to see more of these characters interacting in their own little duos that we don't normally get to see. We still don't get a like Rutherford Boimler storyline here, and that's fine. This did break it up in a way that was unique and different. It wasn't just the Boimler Mariner show and the Rutherford Tendi side story show like we normally get. So I'm not harping on that too much, but it's still something I do want to see. But that's really not a problem with this episode in and of itself. It's just sort of a larger critique about the show that I'm gonna probably keep mentioning until they finally do it at some point. But other than that, fantastic episode, tons of fun, a great little one-off sort of look at these characters and getting them their own little stories and sort of delving into who they are outside of everybody. But that's it for my spoiler-free thoughts on this episode. If you haven't seen the episode or care to not be spoiled in any way but have already seen it, I don't know how that would work, but somehow, conceivably, with a timey-wimey, time loop sort of thing, that could happen. So if you don't want to be spoiled, you can stop now, come back when you have seen the episode, or, never come back. But please come back, because I need you, because we're going to delve into some of these spoilers here. Alright, as I said, this episode was very much a vignette-focused episode, and I have to say I absolutely adored almost every single vignette. I loved the very obvious trial setup of it, that it was very much evoking all the trial stuff. We had the beam of light with the captains and the command staff in it. But when we get to Mariner's storyline, I just like that Mariner's storyline was sort of this big setup for the episode, but really kind of focused on Mariner and Boimler's sort of regular, like, they don't really fit in with the command staff. I enjoyed when they get up on the bridge because they missed the red alert for Rutherford messing with the red alert signal, which was also very funny, that Boimler's just trying to actually make it work and trying to say what he needs to do, but he really has no context for what's happening, and he just can't roll with it, and he just misses his chance to prove what he's doing. And Mariner just sort of like, yeah, man, what are you doing? When clearly she has no idea either. And there's just the fun jokes where, like, the captain says, send them a message, and Mariner, like, pushes the button, and she's like, what did you do that? It's like, sending him a message means shooting, right? And they're like, no, but that's clearly what we see in every episode. A lot of these jokes in this episode are, like, breaking down those tropes. One of the things that I almost wish they would do is they, like, when Boimler is up at the front, like table, like, touching the console, I wish they would do the, like, meme guy that we see in Star Trek. I thought they were going to reference that, but I was kind of hoping for that. A couple other small notes in there that I really thought were funny was, like, I loved how when the captain beamed in, she was, like, doing the hero captain beam in pose, the, like, superhero stance. But really, that sort of storyline was very set uppy and was spoiled a lot in the trailers, to be honest. So I didn't laugh as much, but there was a lot to enjoy there in that sort of opening section. But the two that I really want to focus on and I had the most fun with were the Rutherford and Tendi storylines. I loved Rutherford's conceit that he was upgrading his sort of like tech and just kept popping in and out of the story being like, what the heck is going on? And there was just some really great bits. We got the fan dance from Star Trek 5. I mean, there's nothing more glorious than the fan dance. And I love that it was all revolving around them stealing this Romulan warbird and sort of like the Star Trek 3 thing where they had to like sneak to the museum and get the Starship Enterprise and that sort of thing. Very like fun sort of remixing of a lot of like Star Trek tropes and sort of storylines that we've seen, like the undercover Black Ops thing trying to steal stuff but doing like a ridiculous over the top things to get to it, like the fan dance. And I also like when he comes to and they're in space, he sort of like is bumping into the bird of prey because they're on the cloaked bird of prey. It was just sort of fun, like, yeah, that would probably happen when you like sort of bump into the invisibility cloak of all the time. It was just a lot of fun. I just enjoyed that conceit of like him sort of popping in and out because of his upgrading tech thing, and it like utilized Rutherford as a character well, sort of having him sort of have his own sort of shtick influence the events. I will say Rutherford is still probably the least character that we've had on the show so far. He's mostly just reacting to situations. Yeah, he's kind of a big nerd, but they're all kind of nerds. And the only like real character hook that I have for him is that he's really into Tendi, but doesn't want to say it, which is a fine character thing for him. But most of the time he's a very reactive character instead of a proactive character. So that's something I would like to see a little bit more going forward with him. Give him a little bit more than just he's into Tendi. But we'll sort of see how that sort of plays out as the season continues. The Tendi storyline was obviously my favorite. I just love the fact that she gets sort of brought into this Black Ops group. They're all wearing like the black hoodies like they do, but she gets brought into this Black Ops group because they think she's a part of it, but they just she doesn't know how to bring it up. And there was just some fun, great lines. I love the part where the Andorian is just saying, scanning! Oh my god, they're scanning! No, they're not scanning. Oh my god, they're scanning! Just great stuff. I loved that. I loved the sort of motif of her, because she's telling the story in hindsight, that she's sort of like covering up the story with like blacking out like stuff, and so we get some censorship of the in Tendi's storyline because of the conceit that she's telling this from the future date, so we're not getting all the information. But if you notice, and what I really, really loved, is that everything she censors is really just not well done. There's like one point where Ransom says the ROM beep Yulins, and it's sort of obvious that it's sort of this very meta thing and this meta joke that's kind of subtly layered in there, but it's almost as if Tendi is trying to hide certain details but not doing really well when she's trying to explain it in the trial. Like, she's trying to hide certain details, but they're just coming out anyways because she's just not very good at hiding them. Just a very subtle joke that I thought was very, very funny, that she just was not hiding things at all. Like, he even says, like, I think Ransom at one point says, here's a map of the neutral beep zone. And it's like, okay, so it's a map of the neutral zone. Just absolutely hysterical. And this also gets me to my other part of this storyline that I really like, sort of a subtle detail, as I liked how all the trial storylines, even though it was in vignettes for each character, all influence each other. Like, we saw how they got the map in the Mariner storyline. We saw how they got the Romulan warbird in the Rutherford storyline. And then we saw what they were using that for in the Tendi storyline. And then that all pays off in the final bit where Boimler sort of stands up and says, like, yeah, you know, Starfleet crews are infallible. We don't always know everything. And I like that sort of breaking down this conceit of, like, the Starfleet officers who are always on top of things, because clearly Starfleet officers are not always on top of things, even though that's sort of the myth we as fans and like Starfleet itself within the show sort of tells. I like that Boimler sort of broke that down, and there's just a lot of fun little references like to salt vampires and parallel universes and all that sort of fun. There's like, again, like small little vignettes in all of that peppered in that I thought were great. Which the best one was clearly the reference to Q, where we actually got John Delancey as Q, and I just loved him coming in and was like, I'm going to test humanity, and we got this sort of crazy, weird sci-fi world that was like, oh, we're going to play a game, but we don't know what it is. It's soccer, chess, solitaire, maybe? It was just a very fun little conceit and play on like Q coming in and always wanting to test people with games. Very, very trickster, Loki god-esque, and playing into that character. And John Delancey getting to have a little cameo there was absolutely fantastic. And then him coming back at the end and sort of like, Picard's boring. He always quotes Shakespeare and making wine. It was just absolutely fantastic. And so anyways, I like Boimler's speech at the end there, sort of setting up that sort of trope of Star Trek and sort of breaking it down a little bit, that clearly we know that all these Starfleet officers aren't always knowing everything and on top of their game. And I like that breaking down. But I loved the twist that all this wasn't a trial, that it was actually like a party for the captains. And so them sort of breaking everything down was sort of doing the opposite of what this guy wanted to do. It was very, very sweet and very nice in the end. And I just like that it was sort of making fun of customs of planets and like, yeah, this is our best ballroom, not a judgment hall at all. It was just great. Like I said in my spoiler-filled section, that joke goes on a little bit too long, I think, but I still laughed all my way through for it. So again, that's me reaching for the critique, like me trying to be overly critical of something, because I really just enjoyed pretty much everything in this episode. The one thing that I want to draw your attention to here, and I know I'm like ranting really long here, I'm like looking at my clock to make sure how long I'm ranting here, but one quick note one reference that I want to draw your attention to is at one point Boimler mentions the giant Spock on Palios, I forget the exact name of the planet, but he mentions the giant Spock, which some of you may not know because you may not have seen this series, but that is a reference to the episode The Infinite Vulcan from Star Trek the Animated Series, which is an episode where Spock gets cloned, but his clone is like 60 feet tall.
Behold, gentlemen, the dawning of a new era, the salvation of a galaxy, Spock 2.
And at the end of the episode, that clone is still around. It's still existing on that planet. And since, the animated series canonical connections have been kind of iffy, like, did it happen, did it not happen? Like, we get references to things in it, like Vulcan, like the Forge on Vulcan came from the animated series, the Vulcan desert, the Forge, and so that becomes canon. But the actual status of the stories in the animated series have always been kind of wishy-washy, but we do know Lower Decks is officially canon. So him referencing the giant Spock does mean that giant Spock does exist in canon, and that giant Spock, theoretically, has not died, even though Prime Spock did die in the Kelvin timelines, respects to Leonard Nimoy. But it does mean that potentially still alive at this time in the Prime timeline, there's a 60-foot Vulcan Spock walking around some planet, just living his best 60-foot Vulcan life. That's amazing. What I'm saying is we now need Ethan Peck to come back to play that Spock in a live action setting. It needs to happen. I'm calling you out here right now, Alex Kurtzman. You got to make it happen. I want it. I need it. I'm a Trekkie. I need it in my life. Anyways, that was a really long side trip. I just needed to tell you that little piece of canon bits because that just warms my heart that technically that is canon and there's a giant 60-foot Spock out there. I just needed to inform all of you how excited I am about that. So I'm sorry I went on that little diatribe there, but it was just something, just the things fans do to make ourselves get our giggles. Is really weird, but I just enjoy that. Anyways, I loved this episode. I thought it broke down Starfleet tropes really well, broke down some tropes of Star Trek really well, but also gave us little cool vignettes and insights into these characters that we don't always get to see. I think the only other thing, too, that I will mention is Tendi does beat up a lot of Romulans in this episode, showing that she's really good at martial arts, which kind of means that everyone on this show is really good at martial arts besides maybe Boimler, which is fine. Live their best lives, but like Rutherford, Meriner, and Tendi are all great at martial arts. We've also seen a lot of the Upper Decks crew is really good at martial arts as well. So yeah, everyone's just really good at martial arts in the future, which, whatever. That's a trope. I just think it's kind of funny. But yeah, what did you think of this episode? Did you like Veritas? Did you enjoy it? Did you get all giggly too at the fact that there's now a giant Spock in canon? I'd love to know all that down in the comments below. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more reviews of Lower Decks, more discussions of Star Trek and geek topics, and also social and political issues through geek topics. That's all here right on this channel. What else do I do? Do I do other stuff? Oh yeah, I have a Patreon page that you can help support me at if you want to help make this channel even better. You can also get yourself cool perks like access to my Star Trek Enterprise podcast that I do that is exclusive to my Patreons. But beyond all of that stuff, whether you comment, subscribe, or listen to me rant about Star Trek Enterprise on my Patreon page, I just hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. Thank you so much to all of my patrons, especially Ashley Allen Bokikio, Miranda Janelle, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Christina Dalliance, Greg Gillum, Stephen Clinard, Munir Amlani, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wayne Twitchell, Ish the Mad, Buttoneer, Randy Thompson, Jemshin, Lorena Mesa, Mari Neckar, Wellington Marcus, John Steele, Michael Beam, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Jason Knott, Maeve, Subraxis, Tonya Trummer, Wen Dizzle-Bizzle, Gretchen Badger, Dante St. James, Polly Mina, Piston Twisted Garage, and Bree Beecher. Thank you all so much for your continued support.